Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The girls at the old photo shop, Coney Island, New York, summer 1978. They said it was just a summer photo, taken after lunch when the wind kept lifting their hair into their faces. Linda had her arm around her sister's shoulder, both of them squinting into the light, impatient to return to the water. Behind them, the old-time photo sign leaned slightly, its letters already fading, already behind the moment. Years later, Linda noticed the background first. Two pale figures stood near the railing, blurred in a way the rest of the image was not. She didn't remember anyone there. She remembered the heat, the salt, the way her sister laughed too loudly that day. The figures faced the girls, not the camera, as if watching something that hadn't happened yet. One stood exactly where her sister drowned the following August, in water shallow enough that no one thought to worry. Linda kept the photo. It was the only place where her sister was still being watched. The face that would not fade. Providence, Rhode Island. 1963. It began as a routine identification photo, taken in a municipal office that smelled faintly of dust and wet coats. The woman sat straight, hands folded in her lap, and did exactly as she was told. The clerk remembered her as calm, almost polite, though he couldn't recall her name afterward. When the photo was developed, the face appeared sharper than expected, the eyes darker, fixed forward with a patience that felt practiced. Copies were made and filed, then forgotten. Years later, employees noticed the image had changed. The hair seemed fuller, the mouth slightly altered, as if adjusting to speak. No record of the woman could be found, no address, no signature, no matching fingerprints. Yet the photograph never yellowed like the others. It remained clear, intact, quietly preserved. On quiet afternoons, clerks felt watched while passing the file drawer. The unsettling part was not the stare itself, but the growing sense that the face was waiting, confident it would eventually be remembered. The third window, rural Ohio, autumn 1986. The photograph was taken in the yard behind the house just before dinner, when the light softened and made everyone look kinder than they felt. Harold stood with his arm around Margaret, both of them dressed as they always were for company, steady and unsmiling. The red siding behind them had been freshly painted that year, and the windows were new, squared and clean. It was Margaret who noticed it later while sorting photos at the kitchen table. In the right-hand window, a pale face hovered where the glass should have reflected only trees. At first, she assumed it was glare, or her own shape doubled by age. But the face was thinner, the eyes lifted slightly, as if trying to be seen. Harold said nothing when she showed him. He only put the photo back in its envelope and closed the drawer. The following winter, after Harold passed, Margaret noticed something else. In newer photos, she was no longer standing alone. There was always someone waiting in the window. The woman beyond the fence. Lower Silesia, Poland, 1942. The photograph shows Marta Keller at her garden gate, smiling in the careful way people did when a camera appeared unexpectedly. She had been gathering potatoes, the bucket still heavy in her hand, the dirt path pressed flat by years of walking the same route home. Behind her, the fence leans where boards were replaced unevenly after the winter. At first glance, nothing else seems present. It was Marta's granddaughter who noticed the face years later, emerging from the brush beyond the fence line. Pale, narrow, watching. It does not belong to any neighbor remembered by name. Marta never spoke of strangers, yet she locked the gate every night after that summer, even when no one else did. The face appears half-formed, as if the earth itself were practicing a memory. Records show that a woman once lived on that strip of land before the fence was built, removed quietly and without notice. Marta's smile, once seen again, no longer looks directed at the camera, but towards something she recognized and expected to return. The weight he didn't feel. Los Angeles, California, 1969. The party had already gone on too long by the time the photograph was taken. Music drifted unevenly through the room, drinks sweating onto low tables, people half watching a woman pose near the inflatable pool. The man in the foreground leaned forward, tired, his striped shirt creasing at the shoulders as if carrying more than his own weight. No one noticed anything unusual that night. It was only years later, after the photos surfaced in a box of negatives, that someone pointed to his back, a shape pressed close, darker than shadow, with the suggestion of a face resting between his shoulders. It did not belong to anyone remembered at the party. The man himself would later say he left early, suddenly exhausted, as if the air had thickened around him. He never returned to gatherings like that. What unsettled viewers most was not the figure's presence, but its posture. Leaning in, familiar, as though it had been there long before the music started and had no intention of leaving when it stopped. The face in the red cup. Austin, Texas. Winter 2017. It was an ordinary kitchen party, loud in the way apartments get when too many people lean against the counters at once. Someone had burned frozen pizza, someone else was laughing too hard, and the red cups kept multiplying without anyone remembering who brought them. The photo caught a moment of shared amusement. Faces turned toward one another, mid-conversation. No one noticed the cup near the stove. It sat half full, condensation sliding down its side, reflecting the overhead light at an odd angle. Days later, when the photo was posted and zoomed in, a face appeared inside the plastic, elongated, distorted, eyes too dark to be reflections. It seemed pressed against the inner curve, as if trapped just beneath the surface. Everyone joked at first, blaming shadows and cheap lenses, but the man standing closest said something else bothered him. He remembered that cup. It had been empty every time he looked at it. He couldn't explain how a face could form where nothing had ever been poured. The face in the cracked wall. Marseille, France, late afternoon, 1952. The photograph was meant to capture the courtyard before renovation. A simple record of peeling plaster and creeping vines. Sunlight struck the wall unevenly, catching every crack and stain left by years of damp winters. No one noticed anything unusual when the picture was taken. It hung in a folder with dozens of others, all equally unremarkable. Decades later, a mason paused while reviewing the image. Near the lower edge of the wall, where the plaster had split and darkened, a face seemed to form. Eyes sunken, mouth slightly open, as if pressed outward from inside the stone. At first it looked like coincidence, the mind filling in gaps. But the longer he stared, the clearer it became. Old neighbors spoke of a woman who had died in that building during the war, sealed inside when a collapse was hastily repaired. The wall was eventually torn down. The face never appeared in photographs of the empty space, only in the one taken while it still had something to hold. The one who stayed beneath the bridge. Transylvania, Romania. Late summer, 1911. The photograph was taken to document village life, nothing more. Two women bent at the stream, skirts tucked carefully, hands moving through the cold water with practiced ease. The stone bridge above them was old but trusted, its arch dark with years of passing floods. No one paid attention to the shadow beneath it. Only later, when the image was enlarged, did a shape appear in the darkness under the arch. Tall, pale, almost human, as if formed from mist rising against the stone. It did not touch the water, yet it seemed anchored there. Elders remembered a man swept away during a sudden storm decades earlier, his body never recovered. His name spoken only once a year and then avoided. The women in the photo lived long lives, but both refused to wash beneath that bridge again. They said the water there felt heavy. as if someone beneath it was still standing, waiting to be acknowledged before he could finally move on. The shape left behind, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Early morning, 2014. The fire had already been called an accident by the time the photograph was taken. Daylight crept through the broken doorway, revealing what was left of the living room. Collapsed beams, blistered walls, a single chair warped into a useless curve. The homeowner stood just outside the frame, quiet, watching the smoke lift in thin, tired threads from the floor. Nothing moved when the picture was snapped. Later, while reviewing the damage, he noticed a pale shape rising near the center of the room. Lighter than ash, softer than smoke. It looked almost human, as if someone were standing up slowly, unsure whether it was allowed to leave. Investigators dismissed it as heat distortion. Still, the man couldn't shake the feeling that something had been interrupted. Neighbors remembered an elderly tenant who refused to sleep upstairs, who said the house settled too loudly at night. After the cleanup, the floor there was always colder. Even in summer, dust would not stay undisturbed. As if something unseen kept passing through, rehearsing the moment it never finished, the moment they couldn't save. New York City, hospital ward, 1938. The photograph was taken for documentation, not remembrance. A nurse adjusted the sheet, 2 orderlies leaned in, and the young woman lay back with her eyes half closed, calm in the practiced way patients learn to be. The room smelled of disinfectant and steam heat, ordinary and reassuring. At first glance, it is simply a record of care. Only later does the unease settle. Behind the bed, between the men's shoulders, a faint figure stands where no one should fit. Its outline is softer than the others, its face indistinct, as if already loosening from the moment. Hospital records show the woman survived the procedure, but died quietly that night, after the ward lights were lowered. The staff insisted nothing unusual happened. Yet those who studied the photograph noticed something troubling. The figure in the background is not watching the doctors, it is watching her. Patient, familiar, as if it had arrived early, confident there would be nothing left to do but wait until everyone else stepped away. The one in the lattice, Lisbon, Portugal, late afternoon, 2019. It was meant to be a simple photo taken on a walk, the kind shared once and then forgotten. The woman stood by the tiled doorway, one hand on the stroller, smiling because the baby had finally stopped fussing. Behind her, the old building kept its cool shade, the patterned window dark against the bright street. Nothing seemed unusual at first. It was only later, scrolling back through the image at home, that she noticed the shape behind the lattice. A face, pale and narrow, set too deep in the darkness to belong to anyone inside. It wasn't reflected glass, and it wasn't aligned with her own position. The eyes appeared level, attentive, as if watching the child rather than her. She remembered how the baby had gone quiet at that spot, staring past her shoulder, fingers tightening on the stroller bar. The building had once been a hospital, closed decades earlier. She never walked that route again. Still, in other photos, she sometimes wonders who the baby is smiling at now, just out of frame. The face that grew with the thorns. Sonoran Desert, Arizona, spring 2008. The photograph was taken during a quiet walk, the kind meant only to document an abandoned family plot half swallowed by brush. Rusted iron curled inward, its pattern softened by years of wind and sand. The cactus had grown unchecked, pads torn and scarred, branches tangled into something almost protective. No one noticed anything unusual at the time. It was only later, enlarging the image to study the old fence, that a face appeared among the thorns. Not carved, not placed, formed. Eyes set too evenly, a mouth suggested by shadow and rot. It looked less like something hiding than something emerging. Locals spoke of a woman buried there without a marker after a fever took her, her grave lost when the land was sold and forgotten. The plants were said to grow strangely fast in that corner. What unsettled viewers most was not the face itself, but how naturally it fit the growth, as if the desert had learned her features by heart and refused to let them fade. The Bride Who Wasn't Alone, Salem County, New Jersey, autumn night, 1996. The photograph was taken during a small gathering, meant to be playful. Someone had found an old wedding dress in the attic, yellowed lace and stiff sleeves, and convinced her to try it on. She bent forward, laughing, hair falling over her face, pretending to faint for the camera. The room smelled of candle wax and old wood, familiar and safe. No one noticed the cabinet behind her. It was only later, after the film was developed, that the eyes appeared. Two small points of light hovered in the glass, level with the dresser's shelf, watching from where no one had been standing. At first, they blamed the flash, then reflection, then imagination. But the house had once belonged to a woman who died days before her wedding. Her dress packed away and never worn. What unsettled them most was not the glowing stare, but its position. Patient, close, as if pleased someone else had finally put on what she had been waiting to finish. The prayer that answered back. Apennine Forest, Italy, nightfall, 2004. The photograph was taken after a long walk, when the forest had gone quiet enough to hear your own breathing. Someone had arranged the small shrine years earlier. A statue tucked into stone, rosaries draped carefully so they wouldn't tangle. It was meant to be comforting. The flash caught damp leaves, rough granite, the pale figure of the Virgin worn smooth by weather and touch. Nothing else seemed present. Only later, when the image was viewed at home, did a second shape appear to the left of the shrine. Thin, upright, human in proportion, but without detail, as if made of breath rather than flesh. It stood close, not reaching for the offerings, not turning away. Locals said prayers there were sometimes answered too quickly or not at all. What unsettled the photographer was the timing. The shape did not look like it was arriving. It looked like it had been standing there already, waiting for someone else to notice that it, too, had something to ask. The shadow that didn't belong. Portland, Oregon, late evening, 2021. The photo was taken quickly, almost as an afterthought. In a bedroom she'd already lived in for 3 years, she stood near the dresser, adjusting her posture, waiting for the flash. The room was familiar. Thrift store mirror, crooked art, a plant she kept forgetting to water. Nothing felt unusual. Later that night, scrolling through the image, she noticed the shadow behind her. It stood near the mirror, tall and pale, shaped like a person, but lacking any detail. It wasn't cast by her body or the lamp. Its edges were too soft, its position slightly wrong. She tried to recreate it the next day, moving lights, standing still, even wearing the same dress. The shadow never returned. What unsettled her was the mirror itself. In the reflection, everything looked normal, except the space where the shadow should have been. That space appeared deeper than the rest, as if the room extended farther there, quietly making space for someone who knew how to stand without being seen. The third passenger. Highway outside Des Moines, Iowa. Night, 1979. The photograph was taken after the dance, when the air had turned cold and the parking lot was nearly empty. Susan and Carol stood close to the car, arms folded, waiting for the engine to warm. Both of them glancing toward the road as if they had heard something move in the dark. The flash caught their faces mid-thought, alert but not afraid. It was only years later, when the photo was found in a box of negatives, that the back seat drew attention. A face sat between the headrests, pale and unfinished, eyes reflecting the light without focus. Neither woman remembered anyone else riding with them that night. They remembered locking the doors, laughing about nothing, driving straight home. What unsettled Susan most was a detail she couldn't explain. She recalled feeling crowded in the front seat, as if someone behind them leaned forward every time the car slowed. The photograph never changed, but neither woman ever liked being alone in the car after dark again. The one who walks between graves. County Clare, Ireland. Midnight, 2012. The photograph was taken without much thought. A quick shot meant to capture how quiet the cemetery looked at night. The air was damp, the stones darkened by years of rain. Flowers left earlier that day already closing in on themselves. Nothing moved while the picture was taken. Only later, back at home, did the figure appear. Near the center path, between two modest headstones, a pale shape stood upright, softly lit, as if carrying its own light. It did not blur like smoke, nor glow like a trick of the lens. It simply stood there, facing the small grave, with the child statue at its foot. Locals said some souls never learn where they belong, especially those buried far from family or forgotten too soon. What unsettled the photographer most was the posture. The figure was not drifting or passing through. It was waiting, patient and familiar, as though this walk between graves was part of a routine it had repeated long after everyone else had gone home. The prayer that was interrupted. Bukovina, Romania. Early morning, 1922. The photograph shows a woman kneeling at the roadside cross, hands pressed together, her headscarf pulled tight against the chill. The hills behind her are quiet, farms spaced far apart. The kind of place where mornings arrived without sound. She had stopped there often, people said, always on her way back from the fields, always for the same length of time. Nothing about the scene seems disturbed. Only later does the eye catch the faint shape rising from the grass beside her. Thin, upright, almost respectful in its distance. It is lighter than the earth, softer than fog, shaped like someone waiting their turn. The woman did not look afraid. Her gaze is lifted, focused, as if listening rather than speaking. Village records mention her husband died the previous winter on that road, never reaching home. What lingers in the photograph is not grief, but timing. It looks less like she is praying alone, and more like someone has already arrived to answer. Quietly stepping closer, just before she finishes. The one who stayed in the kitchen. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Dawn, 2016. The photograph was taken after the fire inspectors left, when the house was quiet enough to hear the settling beams. The kitchen was the worst of it. Cabinets peeled open, a refrigerator blistered into dull metal, a single chair still facing the counter as if someone had stood up too quickly. Nothing moved when the picture was taken. Later, scrolling through the images, a pale figure appeared behind the counter, soft-edged and incomplete, hands resting where flour once spilled every morning. Neighbors said the woman who lived there rose early, always cooking before the sun, always in that same spot. She escaped the fire, they insisted. She was seen outside, but the shape in the photo does not look startled or lost. It looks practiced, familiar with the room's habits. What unsettles viewers is not that she appears in the ruins, but that she seems mid-task, waiting for something to finish baking that never will. The coffin that was chosen. Upper Rhine Valley, Germany. Winter, 1891. The photograph was taken in a carpenter's workshop, meant to document finished work before delivery. Two coffin lids lay side by side on the cold floor, one newly carved and dark with polish, the other rusted and older, pulled from storage and not meant for use. The craftsman remembered the order clearly. A widow had asked for the newer one, something sturdy, something that would last. When the image was developed, a faint shape appeared along the center of the polished lid, lighter than the wood, almost like a body-shaped shadow pressed from within. At first, he blamed dust, but the mark did not fade with cleaning. Church records later showed the widow never returned to collect the coffin. She was buried weeks later in the older one instead, after collapsing at home. The unused lid was kept in the shop for years. No one ever chose it again. Those who worked there said it already looked occupied, as if it had been made with someone specific in mind, and was still quietly waiting for them to arrive. And now, the photograph fades, but the question remains. Was what you saw only light, shadow, and chance? Or something that chose to reveal itself just once? Old photos don't move, but they remember. And sometimes, they remember more than the living do. If you noticed something unsettling in these images, a face, a figure, a presence others might miss, tell us in the comments. Which photo stayed with you the longest? And do you believe these moments are accidents or quiet witnesses left behind? If these stories made you look twice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because the next photo may look ordinary too, until it isn't.